Hello, everyone. We're going to get started. We definitely appreciate your time this morning. My name is Brian Smits. I'm Director of Global Solutions here at Replicon. I'm joined by my teammate, Rajiv Borison, who's Director of Solution Engineering. We're really excited to speak with you this morning and appreciate your time to discuss solving complex time and attendance, global labor compliance, and mobile workforce challenges. Our agenda today, we'll give you a brief introduction to Replicon and who we are. We'll talk about challenges around global time and gross pay. We'll talk about the considerations to look for in a solution, how to take a balanced approach to finding a solution that fits your organization. We'll give you a quick demonstration of our live platform, and then we'll talk about the ROI that you can expect from a transformation. A few housekeeping items. You'll be on mute during the presentation. Q&A will be at the end of the webinar, but you can submit questions at any time via the questions text box at the right-hand side of the screen. So who we are. This is a little bit about Replicon. So our current co-CEOs, a husband and wife team, founded this organization over 20 years ago. They actually wrote the first instance of the product themselves. And we've since grown to over 450 employees. We sit in 5 countries around the world. Our platform is deployed in 70 countries. It's viewed in 20 languages with just as many currencies. Now, at this point, we nearly have 8,000 clients. About 1,000 of those are in the enterprise, large global enterprise space. And we do have significant levels of uptime, and that's because of the fact that we are hosted in the AWS cloud. Now that gives us significant flexibility in how we deliver the platform, but it's also a very secure way of delivering the platform. And we have access to regional instances of the platform that give us the ability to be compliant with regards to statutory compliance and data privacy impact. Now, why is time so important and why is keeping time so important? Well, for 1,000 employees, you have 2 million hours in a year. Now, up to 50,000 employees, you have 104 million hours. Now that might seem like a lot of opportunity, but at the end of the day, it is a finite resource. And organizations only have the same amount of time to utilize every day. So therefore, organizations that utilize their time in a more informed and intelligent way have a competitive advantage. But to do that, you need to have a new way of thinking and a new way of approaching how you manage time. And that's where Replicon comes in with our time intelligence platform. Now, time intelligence is a concept of treating time as a valuable asset. And the more time intelligent you are, that means that you have better access to information, gives you the opportunity to make better decisions, and the better the decisions made by the organization, the better the outcome at the end of the day. So when you're treating time as an asset, you're helping your company manage the most scarce resource, which is your people's time. So how do we help? So this is Replicon's time intelligence platform. Now, at the left is how we gather data. At the right is how we present families of functionality to our clients and our prospective clients. Now on the left-hand side, this is what we refer to as harvesting data. So you can get data into the Replicon platform in 2 different ways. The first is direct signals. Direct signals are where we are interacting directly with the employees. Now this could be via a computer, this could be via a phone, a tablet, a clock, an iPad that we turn into a clock. There are a myriad of ways that we can directly interact with employees. Now, the second way is indirect time signals. Now, this is where we are harvesting data from a system that's already deployed in our client's ecosystem. Now, that could be a gate access system, that could be a security system, a telephony system, even kind of a job management system. There are a lot of different ways that we can get that data into the platform. Now, once we've harvested the data, regardless of how it's captured, we bring it into the platform and we ensure that it's accurate, and we go through a process of really ensuring that there's context to that information. We utilize machine learning, AI, and other ways to make painstakingly sure that it's accurate data and it's processed on time for payroll. Now, as you'll see as we move to the right, there are a lot of different feature functionality choices that can be made, generally around time and attendance, time off, and project management. Now, at the far right, you'll see the three different functionality families that we have. Now, enterprise time management is where we are delivering a mobile app as a digitized front end to an ERP platform. So, for instance, an SAP client can give us their work breakdown structure. We capture time in our mobile application, apply it to that work breakdown structure, and then send it back to the client's instance of SAP. The second is global time and gross pay. Now, this is the platform that we're going to talk about today. Anytime that we are touching payroll or sending information to payroll that drives pay, we are utilizing this section of the platform because it allows us the opportunity to provide a statutorily compliant gross payroll file in each country where a client is deployed, and we'll talk about that in more detail. Professional services automation is our project management functionality, and as you'll see in just a couple of inches to the left, that's where you'll see project costing, expenses against projects, all the way to invoicing a client for billable time. Now, we just talked about some common use cases being enterprise time management for ERP, professional services automation for project management, and global time for payroll. But there are other use cases because it's a nimble platform. Streamlining payroll, especially in a global transformation, is a significant use case. On the right-hand side, you'll see compliance management. That is a core pillar of our global offering. And things like shared service administration are pretty common for us in the enterprise space, as well as the remote workforce. So what are the challenges around time collection and gross pay creation? Well, global organizations know this better than most, but it can be very complex to process payrolls. You have multiple countries, multiple locations in those countries. Some of those locations can have multiple entities. There are all different types of employees. Some don't sit at a desk anymore. There are collective bargaining agreements that add complexity. Statutory impact is complex, and PTO varies by country. Now, these are all things that add to the degree of difficulty when getting some payrolls processed on time and accurately. Now, those challenges really kind of create what we call a traditional approach, which is finding something that fits individually by country. Now, that could be a local provider, that could be a local vendor, it could be a spreadsheet, it could be a 3-ring binder. There are all different types of ways that it can be done, and it creates a very complex ecosystem to take care of for IT, for payroll. And it's not uncommon for us to find a global company with 10,000 employees that has up to 36 to 40 time systems. So here are the common challenges that come out of that traditional deployment, and we'll talk about these in detail. But lack of visibility is a challenge. Scale, compliance is a big one we'll talk about. as a theme in today's conversation, and the ability to get all employees involved in very extended life cycles of the implementation. So lack of visibility. Multiple time systems, as you'll see in a disparate deployment, are often in different time zones. They're in different languages. They're siloed. They're not accessible by the entire HR payroll team. And that can create kind of disparate, fragmented views of information, which makes global visibility prior to payroll pretty challenging. Now, scale. Scale is different things in different situations. It can be hard for an organization that has a disparate deployment to scale geographically because they don't have a core platform to expand from. Now, many traditional time providers also lack the ability to scale. Some providers have excellent capabilities for very large employee populations. Some smaller providers have the ability to deploy very small employee populations, but it's hard to find somebody that can do it all. Some have geographic limitations, some have language limitations, so it's very hard to scale globally in a very concise way. Compliance. Compliance is the client's problem in many cases when timekeeping is discussed. Each country has different federal requirements, different CBA impact. There are countries that have work councils, a lot of other impacts, and legislative compliance is the biggest challenge faced by organizations according to EY's global survey. Now, there are a lot of different employee types under employment today. Some sit at a desk, some travel, some are offshore, some are tracking jobs, projects, costs by location, all these different things. And it's very hard to encompass them in a single platform, even with some mobile capabilities at work. And again, that can be challenging because it creates seams in the data, seams in the process, and seams in the visibility. Now, implementation cycles. It's not uncommon for us to see large organizations undertake a transformation project and really have a 2 to 3 year horizon till they're completely live with the scope that they've chosen. Now, not only is that an arduous task and does it eat up a lot of resources, but it causes fatigue on the organization, especially in-country resources, because they're the ones that really have to implement that change. So here's what we believe you should look for in a solution. Mobility has to be part of the solution. You have to get all employees involved, even if it's complex data capture out in the field. It needs to harvest time from other systems that you already have, because if you think about it, time data lives all over your ecosystem. There are all sorts of signals about who is doing what task at what time. And if you can harvest that, there's less onus on the employee to interact with the new tool. It has to be configurable because it has to work on day one. It has to work in year 3 and year 5. And there can be a lot of change that goes on in an organization in those time frames. There can be geographic change. There can be process change. There can just be organizational change, M&A transactions, whatever it is. You have to be able to reconfigure the platform to accommodate your needs as they change. Statutory compliance should be part of the platform. We'll talk a little bit about how that's done. Now, it needs to scale as well. And what I mean by that is there should not be geographic constraints to where you can take a platform. It also should be able to accommodate 30,000 employees in a single country or down to a single one employee in a country. So it should scale geographically and to the size of the population. It also needs to work well with the other systems that you have in your ecosystem. Now, taking a balanced approach is a best case scenario. And what do I mean by that? I mean by that you have to have good technology, and that's table stakes to have good technology. But you need to give insightful information and real-time information to payroll. You need to have the ability to deploy globally, mobily. And you also need compliance as a service, so it's not just a technology tool. So we urge prospective clients to take a platform approach, like our time intelligence platform. Now, our scriptable framework means that we have extreme levels of configurability. Now, this helps not only during times of change in an organization, but also helps us to accommodate things like collective bargaining agreements, data workflows, approval workflows, all those other things. It has to be exception driven, so inspection doesn't become your job. It has to be global from the ground up with local control and compliance, and it needs to scale. So let's talk a little bit about some of the feature functionality as it relates to the impact to the organization. Now, I've talked about configurability a couple of times, but configurability allows for accurate shift management and creation. And that ensures proper staffing levels. And if you can staff your organization the appropriate level at all times, you have improved utilization and you're managing cost to the best of the ability. Now, mobile. We deploy a purpose-built mobile app. It's very intuitive. The interface is easy to use, and employees get assistance from tools like chatbots, and that ensures that it's easy to use, that it's adopted, and very high user adoption rates is definitely a precursor to having a successful project and to realizing the ROI of the project. Now, mobile application deployment definitely enriches the employee experience. It gives them more information in the palm of their hand, greater flexibility as to when they can request time off, do a lot of different things, but it gives the organization real-time information, and things like geolocation and geofencing really allow the organization to improve their schedule and location adherence at the same time. So it's a checks and balances against the freedom and the enrichment that you're giving the employees in the field. Now, job structures. So this platform, the Time Intelligence platform, it provides vital insight into the timing of projects, the cost, the profitability of even the most complex projects. And having a good handle on that really, really can help tighten labor costs, especially when you're looking at things like utilization, actual versus budgeted, things like that really help you hone in on how the labor is being spent, how profitable you are in even very complex situations. Now, I've mentioned collective bargaining agreements, but collective bargaining agreements can really have a significant impact on pay, as you all know. So our platform accommodates those CBAs by applying pay rules that are created to essentially take all the calculations of the CBA into account as it affects pay. Now, those can be reconfigured when there's a renegotiation of the CBA, which sometimes is very frequent, sometimes it's less frequent. But this leads to 100% adherence to CBA pay impact. Workflows. So workflows are important. That is one of the fingerprint differentials between organizations is how they handle the workflows, how approvals happen. All these things are very different between organizations. And as part of the implementation process, we create approval workflows that are tailored to the client, but at the same time, they in real time validate that what is going on is within policy and should be approved. And it optimizes things that are dynamic, variables. Who's here to approve today? Who's not here to approve today? All those other things. And really what we do is we take on a lot of the administrative burden with automation without losing any control or adherence, and minimize administrative overhead. Compliance. I've said this again multiple times. I'll say it again. I can't stress enough how important compliance is. And Replicon's the only provider that we're aware of in the global enterprise space providing compliance services. And what we do is we create a statutory payroll in each country. Then we add that to our library so our customers can deploy it when they go into that country. And we continuously monitor those geographies that we're in with our expert in-house team for updates. And I'll tell you a little bit how that change management process happens in a few slides. But right now, we're over 60 countries in our compliance library. So what that means is we can go into a country, we can very quickly turn on a live instance that is federally compliant for a client. And we can also create payrolls for new countries as we go, and we really add by client demand as we go and implement our clients. Now, this is really what we talk about with compliance as a service. In the upper left-hand portion of the slide, you'll see that compliance in a box. Really, that's what we refer to as our compliance library that resides in the platform. We constantly monitor all those geographies. We alert our clients on upcoming changes. And then what we do is we create a new payroll for that geography that's effective dated. And when the law is enacted, let's say January 1, 2020, the new payroll in the platform goes into usage, but we leave the old payroll so our clients can audit to those calculations. And so historical edits are accurate via the right calculation for the right time period. Now, our workbench, our payroll workbench, is a place for the payroll team to go, and it's a single location to view statutorily compliant gross pay files for every country in their deployment. And this level of visibility is generally hard to get because of the fragmented deployment nature of time and attendance, but it can greatly help in pay accuracy and visibility and timeliness of payroll processing. Now, scale, we talked about this a couple of times. It's important. And deploying a true global platform allows our clients to expand without constraint. And by constraint, I mean cost, geographic constraint, and time constraints. We localize as well. We have over 20 languages, so it can be localized to the local employee population, just as many currencies, so it can be utilized in English or in these languages. Now, we're a very flexible platform, and I'll go through this fairly quickly, but I'll try to be concise. As we've talked about, employee time capture can happen in Replicon or outside of Replicon. Employee profiles are coming to us generally from an HRIS platform. Workday, Oracle, ADP, whatever that looks like, it's very easy to get that data in. Schedules can be managed in our platform, as we've discussed, or if you have an industry-specific scheduling platform, you can send us that output. We can be system of record for time off, or we can just handle the requests. Workday clients, for example, have done that with us. Now, once we get all that data, all those variables, again, we look for accuracy, we ensure accuracy, then we start the process of applying compliance, company pay policies, pay rules. And as you'll see, when you get to the global payroll workbench, you do have the opportunity of utilizing rates. That gives you the opportunity to have a very feature functionality rich gross payroll file down to the dollar before sending it to a payroll vendor or an ERP. And plug and play, since we're a pure time player, that's part of the job every single day. We can take and give information from HRIS platform. We can do the same thing with global payroll providers, domestic payroll providers. And to the GL, we're typically sending things like PTO liability reports for time off liability. Now, I've described some of these feature and functionality items, but I'd really like my partner Rajiv to show you that in a live way. Rajiv, I am going to hand you control.
Thanks, Brian. Brian, would you be able to confirm if you're able to see this okay on your side?
I can.
All right, thank you. So just to provide an overview for everyone on the call today, what I'll be doing is walking us through the Replicon platform, and there'll be a couple of different areas I'll provide a little bit of emphasis on. We typically like to provide overviews on the employee experience, the supervisor experience, and some of the administrative functionality that Brian was describing earlier. So we'll actually first start within this part of the actual platform. And the first thing that I wanted to review is talking a little bit more about the compliance service offering that Brian was describing earlier. So if we hop into the administration area, the first thing that everybody will notice here is that there's actually something that requires attention, and we actually provide these ongoing updates in real time. If we take a closer look at exactly what that is, there's an actual compliance dashboard that we expose for our customers. And essentially what this does is that we actually send out notifications in the event there's any ongoing changes within that particular region. And as we're able to see here, there are two in this particular case for Alberta and British Columbia that do require review. Everything else that we're able to see here is completely up to date, so nothing to worry about here. But of course, in this particular example, we actually have Canadian provinces and US states that are broken out. Typically, the compliance dashboard will have all of the necessary regions according to where your organization will be operating out of. And like Brian had described, we can actually have centralized visibility into all of the information that's important to us. So for me to be able to say, okay, well, what changes were made in Alberta exactly, I can see that I have 11 users that are currently assigned to that particular pay policy. And as a result, I understand how this is going to impact my organization. I can review exactly what those changes are. So in this case, we can see that Alberta has removed holiday pay eligibility requirements from its employment standards code. And as a result of this, Replicon has actually automatically updated that pay rule within the actual compliance libraries. So I can go ahead and acknowledge it. I can review some of the previous acknowledgements that have actually been completed in the history. So like Brian had mentioned, if I go ahead and do so, it will actually save all of that information. I can review any of those historic changes. So I can see that BC had actually added holiday pay within April 2017, and that was actually automatically updated within the actual libraries as well. But this is very, very important information for any organization because it helps you stay compliant with those particular regional offices that you might be operating out of. And remember that this doesn't only apply for the actual pay policies, but also leave policies as well. As many people on the call may know, the US particularly has different types of policies around sick leave accruals. You're entitled to 1 hour of sick time after every 30 hours that are worked, and that may vary from state to state. So our compliance libraries also ensure that all of those gets covered as well. And what this is really doing is it's breaking down a couple of other aspects around what we call pay rules. So the compliance libraries are updating these pay policies, and the pay rules themselves, as everyone is able to see, we actually have a global set of policies that are outlined within these particular libraries, things like Costa Rica and the Czech Republic and Germany and that sort of thing. And basically, the pay rules is what's responsible for doing all of the heavy lifting to ensure that the pay calculations are calculated correctly. And if we take a closer look at one of these pay policies, for example, the state of California, we can actually see here that we prevent the ability for users to be able to make edits to this. It actually states that it's maintained by the Replicon compliance team, and there's nothing that I need to do to make sure that this is kept appraised. But the business users that are interacting with this, if there's any changes that need to be made to any of those pay policies, it's very, very straightforward to do so. So as everyone's able to see, if I go ahead and state that anything above 8 hours is going to be considered time and a half, all the business users need to be able to do is map what pay codes some of these pay policies need to be mapped to. And in this particular case, anything above 40 hours in the week could be considered double time as an example. So even though there's a tremendous amount of power under the hood, driven through scripts that allows us to be able to model all of these complexities, your business users will never really be interacting with those underlying scripts. They simply indicate these parameters. And of course, these parameters is also controlled by those scripts that I'm describing. So whatever parameters are necessary to be able to expose to your organization, it's very easy for your business users to be able to go in here, define what those changes are, and after that's been completed, they can then assign them out to the respective regions, business units, groups, or whatever other types of areas within the organization. So ultimately what Replicon does is we can model very complex pay policies, since we simply model it in the scripts, collective bargaining agreements, unionized labor laws as an example, or any of the complexities that we've been talking about according to any of the regions that we spoke about as well. Now, the other thing that Replicon can also do to ensure that we are accommodating your business workflows is automated time capture. So just to talk a little bit more about that, essentially what we do is we are a time harvesting platform. And basically what that means is that we can become intelligent around how we're capturing time within the system. And basically, this gives us the ability to populate time based on any number of characteristics or conditions. These are some simple examples around what I mean. So perhaps I'd like to automatically populate the timesheets for my exempt employees, and they only log into the system to be able to indicate any exceptions. Maybe through access controls, I want to be able to import that into Replicon and be able to have understanding of that as well. And this way, when users sign into the system, they're not necessarily entering any time. They actually get a pre-populated timesheet, and they can only indicate exceptions or changes, anything that actually is required on that regard. The other aspect of the platform is validations. Now, this is very important because this is really where all of the data that we're capturing undergoes very aggressive transformational changes. And what we very commonly hear from a number of our customers is that, look, Replicon, a lot of the information that we're capturing is incorrect. Somebody maybe charged it to the wrong job code. Maybe somebody punched in and forgot to punch out. And we want to be able to correct these changes as early on in the process rather than making it the problem of the approvers or payroll downstream. And this is exactly what the validation rules are in place to be able to do. And I'll show us some examples a little bit later in our presentation today around how the user experience is based on these validations being triggered. But we do have different levels of validation, such as hard versus soft warnings, and we can also change the workflows depending on what needs to be done here. But ultimately, this ensures that the data that we're capturing is corrected, cleansed, and cleaned before we export it out of our system into payroll, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. And a very similar logic applies for routing, approval routing. So another very common thing that customers come to us for is that they state, look, our approvers are inundated, they're receiving hundreds and hundreds of timesheets, and we want to make their lives a little bit simpler. So what Replicon can do to help support this is that we can make intelligent approval routing decisions based on conditions. And to give you an example, if somebody doesn't actually have any overtime or they showed up to work on time for the entire week, there's no unexplained absenteeism, perhaps we're going to automatically approve their timesheet in that scenario. But if there is any of the above, then perhaps it's going to go through special approvals in that particular case. We can actually indicate exactly what those conditions are. We can even indicate things like under what scenarios we'd like to have these approvals escalated up. So if the supervisor is away, maybe they're away sick, we're going to automatically send this off to the supervisor's manager after 48 hours as an example. Of course, that can be changed. So this way we can make sure that no approvals are left overlooked. And we can also support other things like proxy or substitute users to ensure that regardless of what happens with users in the system, you can still administer your approvals as you require. Okay, now the other part of today's overview is I'd just like to briefly talk about how payroll admins are able to interact with the system. And I'm actually going to drill into some different timesheets to give us an overview and an understanding of the user experience when they're actually entering time. And I'll be sure to cover the user experience on the mobile platform a little bit later in our presentation as well. But you'll notice here that I've just signed in as Chris DeFonte. He's an example of a payroll admin. He's also an administrator, which is what we were taking a look at earlier. But each of the tabs that we're actually seeing along the top here, the Replicon platform is very aggressively controlled through permissions. So your team as Replicon administrators, which is typically within your organization, is able to indicate exactly what areas of the platform everybody has access to. And of course, that's controlled through access rights, security permissions, and all that fun stuff. But If we take a closer look at Chris as an example, we can actually say, Chris, when he signs in, he's able to say, okay, I'm interested in seeing any one of these timesheets for the month of January of this year. You can actually apply date filters and say, which areas of interest am I interested in taking a look at? I can see which one of my employees have not yet submitted their timesheets, which ones are overdue as an example. And a very similar view can be exposed for the team managers. So the supervisors themselves will be able to have access to the same information for their team, whereas Chris DeFonte, because he's a payroll admin within the organization, he's able to see it across multiple users or regional offices. So even if you do have multiple regional offices with localized payroll admins at each of those offices, everybody will only be able to see what's relevant for them. And you'll also notice as well that Chris is able to see here that, look, James actually has a timesheet that's awaiting a Richard's approval. So I can actually see exactly those validations that were triggered. We'll drill into this shortly. We can actually see that there's been some time that's getting close to exceeding the initial budgeted hours, as an example. We not only expose this to people in payroll, but anybody else, the supervisors, project managers, that sort of thing. You'll also notice that we can give people the ability, in this case, Chris, he can actually choose to approve this on behalf of that user if necessary. So look, payroll needs to go ahead and proceed with running payroll. They can't chase down users. They don't have time to, reach out to the supervisors. They need to be able to run payroll. And as a result, we can provide this super user access, so to speak. You'll notice that Chris, when he actually attempts to approve this, he actually receives a notification that states, hey, Chris, you're about to bypass the regular approval workflow. Are you sure you want to do that? And remember that even if he hits yes or okay to this, in this case, our audit trails will be tracking all of that activity within the system. It's going to track that Chris had did this on behalf of James Woods on this time of date. We actually send out notifications to the supervisors and the end users to notify them, as an example, in the event something like this occurs. But if we actually expand these out, to be able to see any outstanding approvals. Let's take a closer look at one of these timesheets, like Scott Coleman's here. This is an example of how we can capture some of that punch information within the system, and I'll actually show everybody how this looks like on the mobile platform in a few minutes here. But ultimately what we're doing is we can capture all of that punch data, or we can harvest that punch data through any of the methods that we spoke about earlier, third-party clocks, access controls. All of that information will be imported into the Replicon platform. And the first thing that the users will be able to see is any of those validations that have been triggered. In this case, we can see that Scott Coleman, who's a resident of the state of California, they actually have some meal break waivers. And as a result, we're able to see that he did actually exceed the meal break violation. So not only are we capturing some of his punch time, and not only are we breaking out that punch time in a number of different categories, such as work hours versus break hours and time off, but we can capture details around those punches. So for example, where did that user punch in from? We can capture the GPS coordinates off of our mobile platform. If they are using our smartphone, they can capture where they're punching in from through the GPS coordinates. We can also indicate what device was actually utilized. In this case, we can see all of it was off of his mobile platform. We are pre-populating company holidays. We can see that October 26th was a company holiday, and we can also see that this particular user had worked on that holiday, and as a result, he might be entitled to certain premiums. But all of that information will actually be displayed to the user. So what I've highlighted here at the bottom is essentially what the pay rules are responsible for outputting. So as the users are capturing their punch times, the pay rules is actually doing all of the heavy lifting around making the calculations based on everything that we spoke about, those regional labor laws, based on your organizational pay policies, and we're simply displaying that information to the user directly on the timesheet. And this way, we're eliminating the guessing games. Hey, is my pay correct? Is it not correct? Is there something that needs to be addressed or not? We're proactively telling the user that. And remember, what I've highlighted in blue can also just be displayed. What I've highlighted in green can be hidden. It is completely at your discretion on whether or not you'd like to store pay rates in our system. We ultimately can just send a pay code mapping off to your payroll system, and the payroll system can be responsible for applying the actual rates. Once again, we do apply it very aggressively through permissions. So if you do decide to utilize us to store some of that pay rate information, it is absolutely a possibility. And of course, we only expose it to specific users, but this is a very good way for them to be able to see what they're about to get paid. We can also capture images of that employee, and I'll talk about how the images are essentially captured. If we are using smartphones or tablets, we can use the camera to validate whether or not it's actually that user. And we can also capture where they're punching in from. Not only do we capture the location, but we can also output that on a nice Google Maps overview to actually state, look, all of Scott's punches was actually at a particular site within California. We're able to quickly understand all of that within the actual system. So in the event you have multiple regional offices or sites or any one of those things, we can very easily be able to capture all of those different types of metrics. If there are any validations that are triggered, we're able to very quickly see that here as well. And essentially what Replicon can do to help enforce that all of the punches are being captured in a relevant fashion is that we can ensure that everything is done through geofencing, through IP filtering as an example. There's a number of different metrics and characteristics that we can track for. And not only can we track time in these capacities, but we can also capture time in a little bit more complex capacities, such as against work breakdown structures or projects and tasks. So if we take a closer look at James's timesheet here, we're actually able to see that although he is punching in and out, we're actually allocating them to different types of projects, tasks, or work breakdown structures. We can actually have an understanding of ongoing progress against those particular jobs. And everything that we're taking a look at here, what I've highlighted in red at the bottom, is a very common way for Replicon to front end this information from your ERP system, from your project management system. So all of these, work order codes, job codes, cost center codes, projects, tasks, work breakdown structures might be stored within your front end systems. SAP, Oracle, JD Edwards as an example. So Replicon, leveraging our web services, can simply import that information from your front-end systems, and then when users are entering their time, they simply indicate all of the time that they were actually working on against those particular codes as well. So this is an example of a more complex timesheet, and as everyone's able to see, Replicon can very easily accommodate this with ease. And now, just hopping over to the global payroll workbench that Brian was talking about earlier, essentially what we do is this is the last step that's really involved for folks in payroll to be able to understand what employees are about to get paid. There's additional filters, of course, where they can apply it for date ranges, for pay run statuses, for approval statuses, locations or regional offices, so on and so forth. But here's where everyone's able to see is where we can get an overview on all of the pay code mappings. You'll actually notice, like we are, since we are a global platform, of course, we do support multiple currencies, time zones, and languages as well, and holiday calendars according to each of those regions. Of course, we can very easily output that information. And another very important aspect is the ability for users to be able to see how or which payroll system this needs to be exported for. Now, this would typically cost many organizations hundreds of thousands of dollars in consulting fees to be able to update these types of things. But the power of Replicon is that we leave it to your business users to make changes on the fly. So to give you an example, if I were to state, hey, I need to be able to indicate a location code as to where that employee resides, I can actually do that mapping on my own. So in the event your payroll system has any changes on any of these pay code mappings, it's very minimal work to be able to ensure that all of that information is updated on Replicon side as well. So not only do we expose each of these different file formats, in the event, of course, you have different payroll systems for different regional offices, it's no problem for Replicon to be able to support that. But you're also able to review all of your pay run exports through what we call pay runs in the system. You can understand things like what was previously exported out of the system, get an overview on all of that information. What Replicon can also support, of course, is also the ability to map this out any way that we require, and also for the deltas. And what I mean by deltas is that if there's a correction that needs to be made, perhaps you paid out an employee 8 hours and it needs to be corrected to 5, we can send out a -3 delta into the subsequent payroll period automatically, or it can be exported out manually in the event you require an out-of-cycle payroll run. But something to keep in mind here is everything that I'm describing can be completely automated, so there's no user intervention that's typically required at all. But in the event you want to have the payroll admins quickly review this information as the last step, that is entirely at your discretion, and it's also something that we can very easily support as well. Okay, now the other thing I wanted to review on today's overview today is how the actual Replicon mobile app works. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to fire that up shortly here. And basically what this allows me to do is it allows me to be able to enter my time anywhere, anytime. And this is actually how it looks like. So I'm just going to full screen. This is my iPhone, by the way. We do support apps on both iOS and Android. And basically, we want to make it easy for users to be able to get their time into the system, and not only for users to enter their time, but also make it easy for the approvers or the supervisors to have a centralized overview on managing their team. And we can actually expose all of that information directly from their fingertips. So to give you a quick overview on how this works, I can actually indicate that I'm ready to clock in as an example. We can, if the image capture was turned on, we can take a photo of that employee. In this case, it shows where I've punched in from, and it captures all of the details around that punch. Very, very straightforward, very easy. And as everyone's able to see, we try to make this as simple and as dummy-proof as possible. We can very easily identify that we've clocked in. We've even removed the ability for the user to accidentally punch in twice. You'll notice that we removed the clock in button entirely. And now as the user works throughout the day, they can exit out of the iPhone app. They don't have to keep it open by any means, but they can actually go back into it. They can see that the timer was running. They can then indicate that they're ready to transfer into different work activities or projects or codes. This list is also searchable as well. So no matter how long that list happens to get, we want to make it easy for users to be able to easily identify that, look, I'm going to punch into general administration now, at which point it will actually do that for me. It will clock me into that relevant activity. And I can also review all of this punch information directly on my timesheet. And I can actually see all of that information directly within the platform. Getting that geographical overview on the actual map is also something that we can very easily identify. Getting a breakdown of all of those hours, understanding what I'm about to get paid through that payroll summary that we were speaking about earlier, all of that can very easily be done on the actual mobile app as well. And what we expose for the supervisors is the ability for them to be able to manage their team directly from the mobile app as well. So you'll actually notice there's a dashboard area for the approvers to log into the system to review things like, hey, which timesheets are awaiting approval? Which time off request, as an example, is awaiting approval as well. If I'd like to be able to see where my team is punching in or out from, I can very easily assess that. Very similar to the views that we were taking a look at earlier. I can see all of Jimmy's punches and James. I can see if there's any validations that have been triggered in the system, as an example. I can very easily identify all of that information within the platform as well. And of course, the ability to drill into any one of those timesheets. So if we take a closer look at the same Scott timesheet that we were taking a look at earlier, we also make this available on the mobile app as well. So for supervisors to very quickly assess, hey, there were some validations that were triggered. What were those validations? They can see the same meal break messaging that we were talking about earlier. All of that is made available to the supervisors. They can also get a preview of that pay information like we were talking about earlier. And they can go ahead and choose to approve or reject these individually or all at once. That's entirely up to the team's preference as well. And a very similar logic on time off requests. Users can actually submit leave requests and even expenses and things like that from the mobile app. So if I were to state that the next few days I need to be out on vacation, I can go ahead and indicate that. I can have an understanding of all of my balance information. These leave types, of course, this may vary depending on what regions users reside in, but ultimately we can ensure that all of the appropriate leave types according to that region and the holiday calendars are exposed in the system. In this particular case, I'm able to very easily assess what those holiday calendars need to be as well. So that was the mobile app in a nutshell. What I wanted to actually do next is also talk about how Replicon can accommodate time capture in a more manufacturing type scenario. So in scenarios where you actually have an environment such as manufacturing where laptops or smartphones aren't necessarily as accessible, also very predominant on job sites and construction, how can Replicon support that time capture as well? So what Replicon actually has is something called the Cloud Clock platform, and essentially what that does is we allow users to be able to clock in and out off of tablets. Now, these tablets can be mounted, they could be carried around by supervisors, but ultimately we want to make it very easy. There's a couple of different ways that users are able to interact with these clocks. There's facial recognition, which is definitely the more popular route. It's a form of biometrics. Users don't even have to interact with the clocks at all using facial recognition. They simply walk up to it. You'll also notice as well that there's other things such as a QR code identification and also a user ID. So in this case, I actually have a clock that's mounted in an office, and you'll actually notice that Scott's going to walk up to it. We can actually start detecting his face using facial recognition, and we've now indicated, hey, we know that this is Scott. We can give them all of the punch actions in the system. Do you want to go ahead and punch in or clock into a particular activity code? All of that information is entirely up to you. And of course, he's clocked in. It's as simple as that. Now, what this tablet does is it actually gets more intelligent over time. So depending on users having different hats or facial hair or goggles as an example, the system starts learning different types of facial patterns as you continue to utilize it over time. And of course, in the event you run into any scenarios where it doesn't recognize the user, they can easily revert over to the other methods that I had described, such as the QR code identification or the employee number as well. Okay, now, last but not least, I'm just going to spend a few minutes on the reporting side, just to talk a little bit about how Replicon, after all of the information has been captured, cleansed, validated, how we can then allow your business users to run reports on any one of these metrics. There's a couple of different methods. I'm first going to cover the dashboard reporting, very, very popular for maybe your executive leadership team. They don't want to necessarily get into the details. They just want to assess how the business is doing at a very high level. And this is exactly what it's utilized for. So if I'm interested in seeing things like, hey, where are we spending the most amount of overtime, or where are we spending the most amount of time in general, I can actually take a closer look at hours by activity as an example, and I can see that we're spending a good amount of time coding and testing. We can actually drill into that to see which of those users have been spending the time doing those things. And same sort of logic on monthly hours. I can go ahead and say, okay, in the month of October, we were working the highest amount of hours than we typically do. We can drill into that to see how that's been contributed as an example, or leave. These dashboards can be configured any way that you'd like. You can export that information out of the system. And this way, when users log into the system, they'll have their own dashboard views. We also have reports in our platform. And of course, this is a very good way for your team to be able to drill into the details. So as everyone's able to see, we can have report templates that are made available. You can actually run these at any point in time. You can also create report templates from scratch. You don't have to call Replicon to do any of these things for you. And if I'm interested in saying, okay, which timesheets are outstanding approval, I can go ahead and understand that information by different filters, maybe date periods, users, groups, teams, departments. Even if I want to be able to do this by approval statuses, where I'm only interested in seeing timesheets that are outstanding and awaiting approval. I'm less interested in anything else. That's entirely up to you. But if I go ahead and run this information, as you're able to see, we're able to break this out any way that you require. In this case, it's broken out by time period. I'm able to understand all of the total hours that were worked, broken out into regular versus overtime. And of course, if I were to drill into this, I'm able to add any other metrics that I require. So let's say that I'm interested in seeing the department in which that user resides in. I can go ahead and do a search for that, change where it might be displayed. So your business users can run this content very easily. They don't need any technical training. They're not running database queries. They're literally just searching for any metrics that they want. What is the employee ID number? I'm going to go ahead and add that as well. I'm also interested in seeing totals around where we're incurring the most amount of overtime. I can go ahead and do that. So if I go ahead and rerun this report, all of that information will be very easily accessible to me. When you're happy with how this looks, you can then choose to extract this information out of our system. So we do give you access to all of your data. You can export it in CSV, PDF. You can schedule it to have it automatically sent out, or even save copies. But ultimately, the point that we're driving home here is that Replicon not only allows you to report on your information, but we give you access to all of your data, and it's cleansed, cleaned, and transformed data based on the validations that I was talking about earlier. So that concluded everything that I wanted to show the team today from a product perspective. I'm happy to entertain any questions that the team may have at the end of the presentation, but I will actually pass it back over to Brian for the concluding remarks.
Thanks, Rajiv. All right, perfect. Rajiv, can you just confirm that you can see the slide presentation again, please?
I can. Thanks, Brian.
All right, perfect. So we would just like to give you a small sampling of the clients that we have that are utilizing our platform. And specifically, I'd like to talk about a couple in a little bit more detail. So this is a customer, 10,000 employee tech company, prior to coming to Replicon, they had 4,000 users in the US using the payroll provider's bolt-on time system. They were in 56 countries. They had just as many time systems, a lot of payrolls, multiple collective bargaining agreements from multiple unions, a lot of languages, a lot of currencies. They did globalize payroll, but it didn't solve all of their data collection issues, compliance issues, things like that. Now, after utilizing our platform, they are on a single platform instance with global governance. All their local countries have the control that they need. Headquarters has the visibility that they need. It supports all their countries, all their employees, all the union collective bargaining agreements, overtime, statutory compliance, and really has had an impact on the organization to streamline their process, ensures that payroll is done accurately and done on time. Now, the next scenario is a little bit different. They're 50,000 employee engineering company, so they have needs around project tracking, projects, job tasks, cost centers, all these other places. They're not exempt employees were using the time system from their payroll provider. Project teams had a different solution. They were tracking pay for employees. They needed to bill clients on some of that was billable, had overtime challenges. Absence management was completely separate. All these different platforms. After implementing with Replicon, they had a single platform for time and attendance, for paid time off tracking, for their project tracking, and they utilized compliance, get to their gross pay, and all the way down to billing and invoicing their prospective clients. Now, the last thing that we have to talk about is ROI. So unifying your enterprise time and your gross pay into a single platform is very unique ROI to each organization. And we have ways of getting involved and helping organizations really to look at that and measure that. But it's not something that we can put a stamp on and say, hey, here's the ROI. It's for each individual organization, but it has soft costs as well as hard cost savings. Now, a decrease in payroll error rate from having a single platform, local compliance concerns alleviated, all of those things is 1 to 7%, and that can directly correlate, to a reduction in payroll and more revenue staying with the company that should do so. Administrative cost can be significantly reduced by getting a single platform, getting rid of the seams, getting rid of manual intervention, some of those things. Now, again, something that we can't put a dollar sign on, it's individual to each company, is reduced compliance risk. Having us in between that federal government and your organization does have value. I can't tell you on this call in this forum what that would be, but we can talk about that. Streamlining, getting you to be able to scale has value as well. And increased employee engagement is something that is very valuable. Giving them a usable platform, enveloping them in the transformation, giving them the user experience that they need, regardless of how many employees there are in that country, potentially localizing it in their language, their currency. Those are things that really affect retention and really affect how employees are happy and how they do their jobs. So holistically, there are a lot of ways in this kind of a transformation to affect the return on investment of the organization. On behalf of the entire Replicon team and my partner Rajiv, we'd like to thank you for your time today. We hope you see value in the time that you spent with us and hope you have a tremendous rest of your day. Take care.